I have some great HOA stories for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Here's our first one. HOA in the City Contract, aka How the HOA Got Fined, posted by KiwiFox. So, some quick backstory to this. I don't live with an HOA, thank the divines, but I have had dealings with them. I studied environmental engineering in college, and I have a degree with a specialization in water treatment systems. Normally, though, that's not my day job. Even so, recently, a friend of mine who works with one of the neighboring cities asked me if I wouldn't mind doing some tests for water pollution in a waterfowl preservation area. There had been some strange die-off events going on, and the city was trying to figure out where the source of the pollution was coming from. I'd be operating under a special contract from the city, and I was given access to any location along this waterfowl area, within reason, to perform my test. I won't go into detail about how the tests work, they're involved and can be a pain in the butt, but suffice it to say that I started taking water and soil samples from likely sources along the waterfowl preserve's borders. This showed me that there was a notable amount of nitrates and phosphates in the water, which I surmised was affecting the birds. Now to find the source. I followed the river up its length, passing a number of housing sites, a couple of apartments, and the odd settling pond. Over the course of several weeks and a barrage of tests, these were ruled out as sources. The further I went up the river, though, the stronger the concentrations became, to the point that it was dangerous for humans to even be in contact with the water. We're talking Superfund type pollution. This was last summer. As I waded up along this area, I heard some splashing and the sounds of kids playing in the water. Not good. Not good at all. Turning the bend, I come face to face with the small dock leading into the water and 4 or 5 kids taking turns jumping off of it into the water. The heavily polluted, dangerous water. There's some lady sitting on the dock watching them, and I approached her. I forget the exchange, but it boiled down to me telling her that I'm from the city, and based on some of what had been found, the children were banned from swimming in the river. The lady tried arguing the point until I told her that I was calling the marshal, code enforcement, to have the area barricaded off, and she could explain her complaints to him. She grabbed the kids and scuttled off. Marshall did arrive, found that the dock was not built with the proper code standards, and condemned it, forcing the HOA who had built it to have it demolished within the week, or the city was going to do it and they'd front the bill. That still left the matter of the pollution. That's where things got weird. Once I passed this HOA subdivision, all pollution vanished. I must have done 5 or 6 further tests to verify this, but yeah, no pollution. So, I had my culprit. The next question was figuring out what they were doing. That's where my investigative side comes in. With the help of the marshal, I started going around the properties of the HOA talking with residents. It was a few simple questions like, do you know if they're fertilizing the grass? And when do they do this? And do you know the type of fertilizer they use? Just gathering evidence. Remember the lady from earlier? Turned out she was the HOA president. I only found this out after she called the police on the marshal and I, reporting strange men wandering around her neighborhood. She called them something like 4 times in a day before the police flat out told her they work with the city and if you keep calling, we're charging you. That didn't stop her from following us around in the car and taking photos of us with her phone. Eventually, we spoke with one older gentleman that broke the case, as it were. The HOA president had been fining people for not having perfectly green grass. We were in a drought at the time, so that's no surprise there. After several of the people in the subdivision got fined by the city for watering their grass, she had taken matters into her own hand. She first tried contracting a landscaper to spray the lawns with fertilizer, but due to various EPA regulations, he apparently refused. The homeowner couldn't be certain what the lady had done next, But a couple days after that, some guys turned up with a large farm-type trailer of liquid and sprayed every single foot of grass that the HOA controlled, even right down to the water's edge. With the homeowner's permission, I took several soil samples from around his property and then samples from the common area that joined the grassy area beside the river and the dock. It took about a week to get full results back, but I had my answer. This lady had some contractors or someone spraying farm-grade fertilizer on the grass. This particular fertilizer is heavily controlled by the EPA and requires a special license to even possess, much less use. I presented all my evidence to my contact at the city and laid out just how serious the damage was, and that I was legally obligated to report the HOA to the state regulatory board for gross violations. My contact took the papers and paid me for my services, thanking me, but also noting that if this went to court, I would need to testify about my findings. Epilogue. The court was originally scheduled for March of 2020, but it never came to that. The HOA president entered a plea deal with the state, where she and the HOA was required to pay for the environmental cleanup of the river, as well as restitution to the state. The fines alone topped close to $250,000, and the cleanup, still ongoing, is expected to break $1 million itself. The HOA president got the boot, while the HOA itself was, last I heard, facing being dissolved by the state due to multiple cases of negligence and inept management. I don't know how they came in contact with that fertilizer, though I suspect that some of the charges against the HOA president had something to do with that. Want to know the sad thing though? If the HOA had simply contacted the city or the state, they would have been given a list of approved fertilizers to use, which both wouldn't have polluted the surrounding water and wouldn't have put them on the hook for an environmental disaster. The number is right on the city and state's website. The HOA just couldn't be bothered to look it up. I think my mom is being scammed and or discriminated against by the HOA. Please help. Posted by GuiltyB1562. My mom lives in a condoplex where she purchased a home several years ago, and it's managed by an HOA. When she first moved in, she said that the monthly fees were $240 a month, and then sometimes there are random special assessments. Last year, the complex came under new management, and since then, they have raised the fees to $400 a month. This year alone, she's already paid $10,000 in fees, and she just told me that they have intent to raise them again next year to over $700 a month. Now, I understand that there are always fees associated with owning a condo, but there's several reasons why I have issue with this, and the first is that the complex is not even that nice. It's very old, and it doesn't look like much. All of the outside of the buildings, as well as probably the inside, are completely outdated. The second issue I have with this is that from my understanding, the monthly fees are mostly to cover the maintenance for the various amenities in the complex. However, the pool has not been open for use at all this year, and she also said that the clubhouse has never been opened in the 5 years that she's been living there, except for the HOA meetings. So what exactly are those monthly fees going towards? She also sent me a copy of all the charges that have been posted to her account since last year, and some of them just seem completely ridiculous, especially when taking into account that, I'm assuming in all fairness, she's not the only resident that has been charged with these outrageous fees. I found another unit in the complex that was listed not too long ago, and it says that the monthly HOA is $240, which is the original amount that she was paying, so I think it's a little suspicious. But my stepdad told me that the fees for each unit can vary depending on the size and the location in the complex. They sent out a letter with notice of the plans to increase the monthly fees, and they acknowledged in the letter that the community has been neglected for a long time. However, none of us are well versed in the inner workings of the HOA, and we all think that there's something more going on. I have tried telling my mom that she needs to talk to other residents, but she keeps to herself a lot and doesn't feel comfortable doing that. So I'm having to take matters into my own hands to help her with it. By the way, I also think it's worth mentioning that she's a single Asian woman and lives in a predominantly white neighborhood in Alabama. She's had 2 charges this year around $2,500. One says it was for electrical remediation, and the other charge was a violation fine that she said was for peeling paint when she went to go help clean the clubhouse. Do you think that OP has any legal grounds for this? Let me know. Quite a few years ago now, in the late 1990s and very early on in my career, I used to work for a company that helped customers of certain retail stores manage their finances. My role was a sort of compliance officer, ensuring that the staff who dealt with customers were following the rules. If they messed it up, it was a big problem and could potentially impact the customer's credit score, result in them defaulting on payments, and even end up in court. I took my job pretty seriously. The company was not particularly well run from a management perspective. They'd made a lot of money very quickly and had grown from a handful of people in a garage to a 4-story building in the CBD within the space of a year and a half. There wasn't a great deal in the way of policy or process framework, so I had to develop a lot of the tools to do the job myself. This involved some programming, a basic system to track what I was doing, link to the extensive rule set, and automate some of the more tedious reporting. It would also track how long I was spending on each task so that I could see about which elements I could streamline. Now, I was quite proud of this system and called it Hendrix, as I'm a massive Jimi Hendrix fan, and it used to play about 5 seconds of the instrumental version of Little Wing when it started up. As I had my own little room, cupboard, this never used to annoy anyone. I can geek out about that type of stuff. At this point, before corporate IT became rather more rigid, I used to write a lot of my own tools. I was the only person who was using Hendrix, and it was just a tool for me. My manager, the archetypal middle manager, decided that because it allowed you to quickly reference which rules applied to which situation, it should be rolled out to all staff. Now, I had previously considered this, but I argued that I couldn't guarantee that it would be fit for task because I'd designed it for my own use, and I'd need to make some changes first. But he rolled it out anyway, without me even getting a chance to tweak it. He got a Team Player of the Week award for introducing a tool to make life easier for frontline staff. In his acceptance speech, this was a big rah-rah thing each week for the company, he thanked his manager. I didn't even get a mention. Then, 2 weeks later, he realized that I'd been recording how long I had been working on certain tasks within the program. Now, I'd realized fairly quickly that this part of the program was a little too detailed, and I didn't really care too much about every single task within each incident. So, I just used it to record how long I spent on the entire incident, rather than each part of the incident. My manager invited me to a meeting about Hendrix, no details given, and I attended thinking it was going to be a list of requested features, only to find out that the head of HR was there and I was being given a written warning for falsifying timekeeping. Because each customer interaction was a certain length, my manager had decided that this was what I should be recording, and not how long I was spending listening to, analyzing, checking, and reporting on the interaction. Remember, this is a tool that I had designed for my own use, and it was not being used to calculate how much I was being paid or whether I was doing enough work during the day or not. There was nothing in place for that at all. I had not made the records public. He'd found them in a file on the server that only he and I had access to. Nobody else was supposed to even have this tool. I argued this and was told that it wasn't up to me, and I was getting a warning regardless. It got really quite heated and unpleasant, though I got the impression that the head of HR was a little embarrassed about the whole thing. They said, however, that if I wanted to consult a lawyer, I was quite within my rights to do so. It was at this point that I was rather smugly able to state that I could get 2 lawyers there within the hour, as both my parents were practicing, and my mother was, in point of fact, an employment lawyer. I realize this is a bit of a deus ex machina, but it only has a partial bearing on the story. Suddenly, there was a completely different attitude from my manager. There was an attempt to roll back the issue and turn it into a suggestion that perhaps I should be a bit more careful with my timekeeping in the future. But I was pretty angry at this point. I pointed out that my software had been rolled out to all staff against my wishes. I was told that this wasn't up to me, as it was company intellectual property, until I advised them that I had written it in my own time, at home on my own computer. It was plugging into the official government rule set and not the corporate intranet one. I had not confirmed it fit for general release at all. I had received special dispensation from IT to install it on a single work computer, mine. and I would require them to pay a license fee for anything beyond this. Now, to be fair, this would have been tied up in court for a long time, and I've got no idea whether I'd been successful, so in the end, I relented. If they wanted to use Hendrix, well, I guess they could. I just made sure that Little Wing would play for 1 second longer on startup for every week the software was in use. Then I quit the following Monday and was working for another company by the Monday after that. 3 or 4 months later, I got a phone call from my former manager asking to come fix the problems with my software. He hung up when I quoted him my consultant fees. I don't know why IT weren't able to figure it out. It was just a setting in a text file, not at all hard to find. A friend who remained in the company tells me that they continued to use Hendrix for a whole year. The mornings in the call center were apparently horrifying, with Little Wing playing for around a minute every time someone started a new shift. Sometimes it would play on 20 computers at once, a few seconds apart, on tinny PC speakers that they were unable, due to IT, to mute. Former manager made my life heck, and I finally got her fired, posted by Traveling ABC. I was desperate to join a new job after my husband and I were both laid off last year. When I was offered a new role, I knew it would be a step down from what I was doing, but the manager and the team seemed great, and that part has not changed. However, since my manager, Gary, was so busy, he basically offloaded me to another manager, Jane. I was supposed to be the connection point between my team and Jane, but it quickly became Jane micromanaging me. She would ask me to work through lunch, move or cancel vacation days, call at 11 p.m. on weekends, and order me around on phone calls. She also made nasty comments about my weight and said that I was too big for my race. The list of personal slights so long that it filled 3 pages. I would talk back to her, and she did not like that, and that provoked her more. I only stayed because we needed to pay the bills. I finally had a mental breakdown on a Friday afternoon after she yelled at me for something trivial about scheduling a meeting without including someone from her team who I didn't even know about. I was dealing with a family tragedy. I couldn't take it anymore. I told Gary about the situation with Jane, and he was sympathetic and not at all surprised, considering half her team quit. He immediately offered to move me to a different team under him. I was thrilled. Well, turns out going to the new team didn't help. Jane continued to order me around from afar. When I ignored her emails, she came to my desk one day and started loudly talking about how I am not qualified for this role. Gary overheard and finally told her off, but the verbal abuse did not stop. After 2 months there, I abruptly wrote my resignation letter and stapled the list of Jane's offensive comments and CC'd everyone. Gary offered a bunch of accommodations to try to keep me, but seeing how she was still provoking from afar, I said the only way for me to stay would be for her to go, and he didn't have the authority to let her go. Her manager was in a different country, and despite several HR complaints from at least 5 people, nothing was done. So I left, loudly and without shame, telling everyone exactly why I was leaving. Times were very bad for about 3 months. There were nights that we would eat slices of bread just so we could pay the mortgage and the emergency expenses from a health crisis and funeral. Even after he found a job, we were still catching up on bills and still are. I spent months applying to like 5 or 10 roles per day, sometimes over 20. Last month, I saw a public memo about a big shot from a former company joining the company that I just left. I used to work with this guy closely, and I texted him congrats, let me know if you need any insights on the new place. We had a quick call to where I told him some of the ins and the outs where I thought that they could innovate. After this call, he asked me to join the team as his chief of staff, and I accepted. Imagine Jane's shock when we had our first all-hands call. All the VPs and above were asked to welcome the new big shot in a giant conference room. In Big Shot's speech, he breezed over that I'll be his chief of staff, along with a few key names. I now sat 2 levels above Jane, and apparently within the 3 months that I wasn't there, the other half of her team turned over. Every single person left. Gary was excited for me and said all nice things. However, Jane took the classless route and sent Big Shot an email about how I'm an unqualified idiot, that I used to work for her and how I tried to get her fired, and that she suspects that I lied to get ahead. She didn't even try to be fake nice. Big Shot forwarded me her email and asked what this was about. I was so nervous and excited. Little did Jane know, I was a director at Big Shot's competitor company and was already a level above her, so 2 levels isn't a big leap, and I worked with him for 5 years. I had an hour call with Big Shot, and I told him that she was bad for the company culture and was a nasty person in general. But the evidence that he needed was Gary confirming that her whole team had turned over, my prior resignation letter, which was still sitting on my desktop when I logged in upon return, and a few other nasty emails that she sent her recent staff, which they were happy to share with us. Big Shot fired Jane on Friday. HOA takedown. HOA destroys my property, but I'm not even part of the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you don't miss this crazy fallout, and I'll see you there.